It is Christmas Day in the year 800 AD. The world is on the brink of transformation. In the heart of Rome, the eternal city stands battered yet unyielding, a shadow of its former glory. The cold winter air grips the streets as the faithful gather in the ancient Basilica of St. Peter. Inside, the walls hum with whispered prayers and a growing sense of anticipation. The flicker of torchlight dances upon the faces of kings, bishops, and knights, each aware they are witnesses to history. Suddenly, the silence is shattered. Pope Leo III steps forward, raising a golden crown high above his head. The room seems to hold its breath. Kneeling before him is the mightiest ruler of the age, Charlemagne, the king of the Franks. The crown descends onto his head, and the words echo, "Hail to Charles Augustus, crowned by God, the great and pacific emperor of the Romans." In this moment, the Western Roman Empire, thought dead for over 3 centuries, is reborn. Yet behind this act lies a web of ambition, rivalry, and power. A moment both glorious and contested. This is the story of the coronation of Charlemagne, an event that reshaped the destiny of Europe forever. To truly appreciate the magnitude of Charlemagne's coronation on Christmas Day in 800 AD, we must understand the intricate interplay of power, politics, and faith that shaped this pivotal event. This was no mere crowning. It was a bold assertion of a new world order, orchestrated by 2 of the most powerful figures of the era, Pope Leo III and Charlemagne himself. By the end of the 8th century, Europe was fractured, its political landscape dominated by warring tribes, fragmented kingdoms, and the lingering influence of the Byzantine Empire in the east. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, had emerged as the unifying force in the west, conquering the Lombards in Italy, the Saxons in northern Europe, and forging a vast empire stretching from the Pyrenees to the Elbe River. Rosamund McKitterick, an English medieval historian. She is an expert on the Frankish kingdoms in the 8th and 9th centuries AD, who uses paleographical and manuscript studies to illuminate aspects of the political, cultural, intellectual, religious, and social history of the early Middle Ages, emphasize the strategic brilliance of Charlemagne's reign, noting that his ability to consolidate power through military conquest and administrative reform was unprecedented, creating the most cohesive political entity in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. But Charlemagne's ambitions were not confined to earthly conquests. His vision was deeply rooted in the idea of a united Christendom, an empire bound not just by swords and laws, but by faith. This ambition intersected with Pope Leo III's own needs at a critical juncture. For Pope Leo III, the coronation was as much about survival as it was about ideology. In the years leading up to 800 AD, Leo's position as the head of the church was under threat. Accused of misconduct by Roman nobles, he faced physical attacks and political isolation. Seeking a powerful ally, Leo turned to Charlemagne, the most formidable ruler in the West. As Roger Collins, historian who is an English medievalist, currently an honorary fellow in history at the University of Edinburgh, observes, the coronation was a calculated move by Leo to secure his authority in Rome and establish the papacy as the ultimate source of legitimacy for rulers in the West. The alliance between Charlemagne and the Pope was not without tension. Charlemagne had already demonstrated his dominance through military campaigns and reforms. He did not need the church to legitimize his rule. Yet the crowning provided something more, a divine seal of approval, binding his reign to the legacy of Rome. The setting of the coronation was laden with meaning. On Christmas Day, as the faithful gathered to celebrate the birth of Christ, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans. This act symbolically revived the Western Roman Empire, which had collapsed over 3 centuries earlier. Jean Favier eloquently describes the moment, writing, "The crowning of Charlemagne was not merely the elevation of a man, it was the resurrection of an idea, the idea of a Christian empire uniting Europe under God." The significance was twofold. For the Church, it was a statement of its supreme authority, demonstrating that it alone could confer imperial legitimacy. For Charlemagne, it was the ultimate acknowledgement of his dominance, transforming him from a king to an emperor whose power was ordained by divine will. The coronation was not without its detractors. In Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the event was viewed as a direct challenge to its claim as the legitimate heir to the Roman legacy. At the time, Empress Irene ruled the Eastern Roman Empire, and her authority was already precarious. Charlemagne's new title of Emperor of the Romans added further insult to injury. Matthias Becker comments on this diplomatic tension, noting, "The coronation of Charlemagne marked a definitive break between the eastern and western halves of Christendom, setting the stage for centuries of rivalry that would culminate in the schism of 1054. The implications of the coronation rippled through the geopolitical landscape of the time. While the Byzantines rejected Charlemagne's title, Western Europe began to rally around the idea of a distinct and independent empire, one that would eventually be known as the Holy Roman Empire. But what did Charlemagne himself think of this monumental event? According to Einhard, Charlemagne's biographer, the king was taken by surprise when Pope Leo III placed the crown on his head. Einhard writes, "He would not have entered the church that day had he known the Pope's intentions." This account has led some historians, such as Alessandro Barbero, to argue that Charlemagne may have viewed the coronation as a double-edged sword. While it elevated his status, it also placed him under the shadow of papal authority, implying that his power came not from his conquests, but from the church. Joachim Ehlers, however, offers a nuanced view. While Charlemagne may have initially hesitated, he quickly embraced the imperial title as a tool to legitimize and expand his rule. In the years following the coronation, Charlemagne styled himself as a Roman emperor, issuing decrees and forging alliances that reflected his newfound status. The coronation of Charlemagne was a defining moment that reshaped the course of European history. It marked the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, an institution that would endure for over a millennium. It also established a precedent for the relationship between the church and secular rulers, a relationship that would define the Middle Ages. Joachim Ehlers encapsulates its significance. The coronation was not just a political act, it was a cultural and spiritual milestone, heralding the dawn of a new Christian order in Europe. The coronation of Charlemagne was more than a ceremony. It was a moment where the fate of Europe was rewritten. But to fully grasp its significance, we must turn to the man himself. Who was Charlemagne, the king who became an emperor, and what drove him to reshape the world in his image? We will now explore and try to explain his journey, from the childhood to the end of his life. In the frigid winter of 752 AD, a young Charlemagne undertook his first significant duty on behalf of his father, Pippin the Short. Sent out into the icy conditions of northern Gaul, Charlemagne, barely 10 years old, was tasked with welcoming Pope Zachary to Francia. The scene not only set a precedent for Charlemagne's future ties to the papacy, but symbolized the growing alliance between the Carolingian dynasty and the Catholic Church, one that would become a cornerstone of his rule. Historian Janet L. Nelson describes this encounter as emblematic of Charlemagne's later role as a protector of the church, noting that the Carolingians understood that strength lay in the bond with Rome. Rosamund McKitterick argues that this early moment in Charlemagne's life helped establish his image as a rightful ruler in the eyes of both the Frankish people and the Church. Additionally, Alessandro Barbero explains that the papacy's relationship with the Carolingians would set a new precedent for European rulers, intertwining secular and religious authority. Charlemagne's formative years were marked by the guidance of his father, Pippin the Short, and his mother, Bertrada of Leon. Born in 742 AD, Charlemagne's education and upbringing focused on preparing him for leadership, a legacy strengthened by the Carolingian family's close relationship with the papacy. This alliance was solidified on July 28, 754, when Pope Stephen II arrived in Saint-Denis to crown Pippin as King of the Franks. Charlemagne, his brother Carloman, and his mother Bertrada were all present at this anointing, a ceremony that conferred divine right on the family, underscoring the sacred nature of their rule. This event was significant as it set a new precedent for royal authority through divine sanction. Historian Joachim Ehlers notes that this coronation established a model of kingship linked closely to the Church, one that Charlemagne would later build upon. Matthias Becker highlights how the anointing symbolized a new era for the Franks, where their rulers were not merely secular leaders, but spiritual figures. Jintaro Fuji adds that the inclusion of Charlemagne and his family in the ceremony positioned them as the chosen family for ruling Western Europe, a notion that Charlemagne would embrace and expand upon in his later reign. When Pippin the Short died in 768 AD, his kingdom was divided between Charlemagne and Carloman, in line with Frankish inheritance traditions. However, tension between the two brothers mounted, only to be cut short by Carloman's sudden death in 771 AD. With Carloman's passing, Charlemagne assumed sole rule of the Frankish kingdom, solidifying his position and beginning a reign that would shape medieval Europe. Charlemagne's first major campaign began in 773 AD, when he responded to Pope Adrian I's call for assistance against the Lombards, who were threatening Rome. Charlemagne led his forces into Italy, besieging the Lombard capital at Pavia, and ultimately deposing King Desiderius. In 774 AD, Charlemagne crowned himself King of the Lombards, adding the title to his expanding empire. Historian Roger Collins describes this conquest as the first clear step in Charlemagne's transformation from a regional ruler to a European monarch. In 778 AD, Charlemagne attempted to expand his influence into the Iberian Peninsula to challenge the Umayyad Caliphate and protect the Frankish border. However, this campaign ended in a dramatic retreat, culminating in the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, where Charlemagne's rear guard, including the notable commander Roland, was ambushed by Basque forces. This defeat was later mythologized in the Song of Roland, becoming one of the earliest examples of French epic poetry. Jean Favier explains that Charlemagne's campaigns in Iberia were part of his broader strategy to establish Frankish dominance in Western Europe and gain prestige among Christian rulers. Heinrich Fichtenau adds that although the campaign did not achieve its immediate objectives, the battle's legendary status reinforced Charlemagne's image as a defender of Christendom. Perhaps Charlemagne's longest and most brutal campaigns were those against the Saxons, beginning in 772 AD and lasting over 3 decades. The Saxons resisted Frankish and Christian rule fiercely, leading to a prolonged conflict that included forced conversions, the destruction of Saxon religious sites, and mass executions, most infamously the massacre of Verdun in 782 AD, where Charlemagne reportedly ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxon captives who refused to convert to Christianity. Pierre Richer writes that the Saxon Wars were essential for consolidating Charlemagne's empire, but cast a dark shadow over his reign due to their brutality. Janet L. Nelson emphasizes the ideological aspect of these wars, portraying Charlemagne as a ruler determined to create a unified Christian state. Matthias Becker points out that despite the harsh measures, Charlemagne ultimately succeeded in incorporating Saxony into his empire, reshaping the region's religious and cultural landscape. Charlemagne's reign extended beyond Europe, as he maintained diplomatic relations with the Abbasid Caliphate. In 801 AD, he exchanged gifts with Caliph Harun al-Rashid of Baghdad, receiving luxury items including the famous elephant Abul Abbas. This diplomatic gesture symbolized a mutual respect between two powerful rulers, with Charlemagne and Harun viewing each other as valuable allies against common adversaries, such as the Umayyads in Spain. Historian Joachim Ehlers explains that Charlemagne's exchanges with Harun al-Rashid represented a rare instance of cooperation between Christian and Islamic powers during this period. Rosamund McKitterick describes how these interactions reinforced Charlemagne's image as a formidable figure even outside of Europe. Roger Collins highlights that these exchanges broadened the Frankish court's exposure to other cultures, enriching its cultural influence. Relations with the Byzantine Empire were more complicated. Charlemagne's self-proclaimed title of Emperor in the West challenged Byzantine authority, as Constantinople traditionally viewed itself as the sole Roman Empire. Tensions simmered, particularly as Charlemagne expanded his influence over Italy, but the two empires maintained a delicate balance. In 812 AD, after protracted negotiations, the Byzantine Emperor Michael I formally recognized Charlemagne as Emperor of the Franks, if not of the Romans. Janet L. Nelson argues that this recognition was a diplomatic victory for Charlemagne. Establishing his equal footing with the Eastern Empire, Jean Favier adds that while the Byzantines remained cautious of Charlemagne, the mutual recognition helped stabilize relations. Alessandra Barbero notes that this agreement marked a significant shift in East-West relations, laying groundwork for later cooperation and conflict. Charlemagne's relationship with the papacy was pivotal in his consolidation of power. Following Pope Adrian I's call for help against the Lombards in 773 AD, Charlemagne established himself as protector of Rome. This alliance culminated in 800 AD, when Pope Leo III crowned him Emperor of the Romans. This act solidified Charlemagne's authority over Western Christendom and began the era of the Holy Roman Empire. According to Rosamund McKitterick, the papacy's endorsement elevated Charlemagne's rule to a new level of spiritual and secular authority. Matthias Becker points out that this coronation established the Carolingian dynasty as the preeminent force in Western Europe. Heinrich Fichtenau highlights the significance of the coronation as a defining moment for medieval kingship, intertwining divine right with political power. On Christmas Day in 800 AD, Charlemagne attended Mass in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. In a dramatic moment, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon Charlemagne's head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. This coronation symbolized the union of Frankish and Christian power, reshaping the political landscape of Europe and solidifying Charlemagne's role as the ultimate ruler in the West. The coronation had far-reaching political and symbolic implications. It not only asserted Charlemagne's dominance over Western Europe, but also redefined the church-state relationship. By crowning him emperor, the papacy bestowed divine sanction upon Charlemagne's rule, setting a precedent for the mutual dependence of the papacy and the Holy Roman emperors in medieval Europe. Rosamund McKitterick argues that Charlemagne's coronation as emperor created a model for medieval European governance, where religious and political authority were intertwined. Jean Favier describes the event as a turning point, reshaping the concept of kingship by infusing it with spiritual authority. Matthias Becker concludes that this coronation effectively made Charlemagne the spiritual and temporal leader of Christendom, uniting Western Europe under a single imperial vision. To strengthen his vast empire, Charlemagne implemented a system of governance that balanced central authority with local control. He established the missi dominici, royal envoys sent in pairs to supervise local lords and ensure adherence to his policies. This system helped Charlemagne maintain control over distant territories and check the power of his vassals, ensuring that the empire remained cohesive despite its size. Roger Collins highlights the effectiveness of the missi dominici in stabilizing Charlemagne's empire by extending his influence into local governance. Joachim Ehlers suggests that these reforms were instrumental in maintaining the empire's unity, as they created a balance between regional autonomy and centralized authority. Janet L. Nelson points out that Charlemagne's governance reforms laid a foundational structure for feudalism, which would define European politics in the following centuries. At this point, we would like to stress that Mrs. Janet L. Nelson sadly passed away on the 12th of October this year, just in time of starting of creation of this video. Condolences to her family. Charlemagne's reign also saw a flourishing of culture and education, later known as the Carolingian Renaissance. He established the palace school at Aachen, inviting scholars like Alcuin of York to foster learning and literacy among the Frankish elite. Under Charlemagne, the preservation and copying of classical texts became a priority, ensuring that knowledge from antiquity was passed down through the medieval period. Charlemagne's vision for his empire extended beyond military conquests to creating a political and cultural centre that would reflect his power and his ambitions for the Carolingian Renaissance. Aachen, also known as Aix-la-Chapelle, was chosen for its location near the empire's heart and for its natural hot springs, symbolising both the Frankish and Roman influences on Charlemagne's rule. By the late 8th century, Aachen emerged as the capital and became a centre of governance, religious devotion and intellectual life. At the core of Aachen's transformation was the skilled architect Odo of Metz. Charlemagne commissioned Odo to design the Palatine Chapel, a masterpiece that served as the emperor's personal place of worship and later as his mausoleum. Odo's design combined Roman, Byzantine and Christian elements, reflecting Charlemagne's vision of a unified Christian empire rooted in classical traditions. The chapel's octagonal structure, inspired by San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, was central to Charlemagne's palace complex, symbolizing the Holy Roman Empire's spiritual and political authority. Odo's architectural achievements in Aachen extended beyond the chapel. His layout for the palace complex included residential quarters, administrative offices, and a grand audience hall, turning Aachen into a bustling administrative centre. Historian Janet L. Nelson notes that Aachen's development as the Carolingian capital signified a shift from itinerant kingship to a more centralized form of rule. Rosamund McKitterick emphasizes that the Palatine Chapel embodied Charlemagne's aspirations for a Christianized Roman Empire, merging sacred space with imperial authority. Charlemagne's influence extended into the religious sphere as he sought to unify Christian practices across his empire. He promoted standardized liturgy and ecclesiastical reforms that aligned with Rome, ensuring religious cohesion throughout the Frankish territories. His campaigns in Saxony further demonstrated his commitment to spreading Christianity, albeit through often violent means. Charlemagne's reign transformed the Frankish kingdom into an empire that spanned much of Western Europe. His military conquests, governance reforms, cultural revival, and religious unification created a legacy that influenced the course of European history for centuries. He left behind an empire strengthened by both secular and spiritual authority, setting the foundations for what would become the Holy Roman Empire. Alessandro Barbero argues that Charlemagne's reign was instrumental in forging a European identity, with his influence echoing through the ages. Janet L. Nelson suggests that Charlemagne's role as emperor king and patron of learning, shaped medieval kingship and governance. Rosamund McKitterick concludes that Charlemagne's life symbolized the unity of Christian Europe, with his legacy enduring as one of the most influential rulers in history.